afternoon, and welcome to Murder and Coffee, TPK Roleplay's GM talk show where we discuss all things TTRPGs and game mastering. I am Sarah Franco, one of your hosts this afternoon. My new co-host, joining me for the first time today as the long-term official co-host, is the ever-radiant Luka.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on here full time now instead of just guesting. Today, we will be talking about narrative threads and the art of foreshadowing with our exceptional guests, Midnight Tower, Tove and Erik. We will be accepting audience questions from all of you GMs and intrepid adventurers throughout the stream. So feel free to post them in chat, call them out. But before we get to all that, let's introduce our guests.
Yes. So Tove and Erik are a two-person team behind Midnight Tower, a creator of Dungeons & Dragons adventures based in Oxford in the UK. They are a couple of lifelong geeks who love role-playing games and books. Tove and Erik published the first Midnight Tower adventures in 2019. Tove plays a level 15 warlock known as Nora Jay, who accidentally lost her soul on a bet with Asmodeus at a shady tavern. It really could happen to anybody. And Erik plays November Netherwood, a level 7 war cleric with a penchant for red clothes and tavern brawls. They live in a small house on the outskirts of Oxford near C.S. Lewis's pond and within walking distance of one of J.R.R. Tolkien's former homes. I'm so jealous. And they share that home with over 2,000 books, 2 riotous daughters, and various pets. A little bit more on Midnight Tower, they've put out some incredible adventures such as Rise of the Ice Dragons, The Prophecy of Nine Omens, and Before the Stroke of Midnight. We've actually had the pleasure of playing one of the adventures here on TPK Roleplay, What Happened to Evie Ashwood, and you can check that out on our YouTube channel. Their newest adventure, which is called The Secrets of the Drow Trilogy, was funded on Kickstarter in mid-October, but you can still pledge if you click on that link. There we go, boom, boom. And they have a variety of other content available on their website that you can check out. Tove and Erik, welcome to Murder and Coffee. We're so excited to have you. What are we drinking today? What kind of coffee we rocking?
Double espresso,
Yeah.
as always.
Very fatty.
No, that is just normal.
Yeah, that is
Yes.
normal.
Yes. And we're gonna need that quick mug check from everybody so we can cheers, get thoroughly caffeinated. Oh, very, very good.
Brandy.
We are so excited to have you today. Is there anything we didn't cover kind of in the bio that would be helpful for our viewers to know about you?
Not really. No, our characters are higher level now. Then we wrote the volumes.
You are higher level.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
that's true.
I haven't played Nora for forever because I've been DMing.
Yes,
But you are, huh? Yeah, you have increased it.
that is true.
I should kill you off. This is murder and copy.
That is untrue.
It happened.
I
It
guess
has
that's
happened before.
Awesome. So, now that we've gotten through all the intro stuff, I would love to dive into the topic at hand, which is foreshadowing and the art of narrative threads. So to start, you guys, what got you into TTRPGs? What inspired you to start writing? Kind of give us a little background there.
Well, we've been gaming for forever, as most people nowadays, unless you're new, of course, because some people are new as well. And we decided in 2019, we figured out hang on, you can actually sell adventures. You write your adventure and you can sell it. And although it's nice to earn money, the main thing was to share them with other people, And nowadays, a lot of people, they don't have time to write their own adventures. So, and we were like, we really wanted to buy Tome first. So we're like, we'll put up these adventures on the Games Guild and maybe someone will buy them, at least using the maps, And that's how it started. And then I talked you into doing a Kickstarter later on. And yeah, that's how it started. And that's how it's continuing for some reason.
That's amazing. when you first started, were these just like, hey, I've written this for my home game, might as well share it with a larger audience kind of a deal? Did you run these before, kind of putting them out with your own crews?
Some of them has been play tested, and some has just been sort of like, oh, it would be nice to have because. So we live in Oxford, and you play with British people as well. You don't really play Dungeons and Dragons.
Rarely, no.
Yeah. So our sort of old childhood Dungeons and Dragons friends are in Sweden. So we didn't get to play with them as often as we wanted. So that's why we started writing the adventures as well. And then later on, so part of the world is from the world that we have always been playing in. But some of the adventures we've play tested with our friends, and some of them is just written and sort of out in the internet you go. So yeah.
When you write, so when I plan out an adventure, I heard somewhere that Pixar won't write a new movie unless they have the ending in mind. So I always figure out the ending first. But I am just wondering, as far as like following the narrative thread, do you always know the ending when you start, or do you kind of end up there? How do you plot out like the entire adventure from beginning to end?
So I'm doing the main part of the writing. I do a lot of the plotting, and then later on, when it's like half finished and in a really kind of crappy version, I give it to Erik. And
Excellent.
It looks really nice, and then I take all the credit for it. So that's my version. You're my different.
That's very true.
But I have a list of things which is mainly just random ideas. So when I want to write an adventure, I look at that list. I'm like, oh, what's on my crazy list? And then I go like, oh, hang on, these two are kind of connected. And then I usually sit down and make a mind map. I might not have the ending ready, but I usually have the theme. So I know if this is going to be an adventure set in the Feywild, or if it's going to be Drows, and then I tend to structure it. And when I structure it, I figure out the ending. So I know the ending before I start writing, but I might not know the ending when I start plotting, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And we actually
speaking of mind maps, Sarah, if you could
go up really quick, and it'll be kind of small chat. So if you would like to see it in better detail, check out our Discord. I'll be posting it in TPK show discussions as well, but that should be visible now on the screen. So can you talk us through this mind map? Like, I'm assuming you start at the center and kind of work out from there.
Well, I don't have it up here, but I can talk about it in general. So I usually start with something in the middle, like, what's the name of the adventure, or if it's going to be, just a Feywild adventure or Secrets of the Drow. And then I start thinking about things that, associations that, or IDs that I have. And it's like, oh, it would be cool with, a cursed book, or for the Lovecraft book adventure, for example. Then I had all of these Lovecraftian IDs that I wanted to merge into the adventure. And then mainly I just add things, and then eventually the page tends to be full, and that's a good time to stop. So, because I've heard it's crazy to continue at that stage. So that's what I do. And then I start looking at, what's going to be Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. And I see which part of this that will actually fit into the story and how it's connected. So I try to have separate sort of beats or stories, where this is a part where they go to the cemetery, or this is a part outside the tower and what's happening then. And then later on, I look through that and go like, oh, hang on, I've had the same ID twice. Maybe I need to change that, or just change it a little bit so the players won't notice. So yeah, that's pretty way. That's the way I write it. And then when I'm halfway finished and I'm bored, I'm like, you can do the rest. Here you go. So chuck it in.
Yeah, and Erik, can you talk about, so you get kind of what Tove's already laid out. What's your process from there?
Usually I start with asking who actually wrote this, because it seems like it's written, it's so much content normally that it seems like it'd be written by 4 people in the span that one person could write it. Because I don't know how you do it. Yes, coffee. So then it's a good question. I typically try to, because I'm focused more on language and phrasing and things like that, atmosphere and flavor and purple prose, really. And I usually edit the text and I end up with way too many words. And then I have to go back and then I have to strip all these words out so I can actually fit this adventure on a page. And then if there are things that seem unclear to me or anything, which is very unusual, then we have a conversation about that. And then, and then we hand it over. After that, we have a bunch of, what would you call them? Beta
angels?
Yeah, angels, the saviors, who we hand over the adventures to, and they read it and they come back to us with feedback ranging from spelling mistakes to, what is this? Is this what? So we get all different kinds of feedback, and then we take it back. So there's a lot of going back and forth between us two and other people.
Yeah, I love that addition of the other eyes. It's something that Luka and I can relate, because we are often working on projects where it's like we want to talk to each other, but we're either playing in each other's games or something like that. So having that,
this is the curse.
The curse of the games. But having that network of other writers, game masters, whoever to kind of bounce ideas off of. I know I can personally vouch. We've got some incredible creators in TVK that I'm like, hey, does this make sense? Like, is this valid? Like, did I just, or it's the scene from Always Sunny with the cork board and I'm just ranting and raving.
This makes sense. Can you follow these threads? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense, right?
I'm looking at this mind map and it very much looks like I could just add in red string here and it would be a good background for that image. This is such organized chaos. I love it. When Erik, when you take this over, like, other than just like filling in the flavor and everything, is there like a set of like a checklist of things that you always go through when you're formalizing things, or is it just kind of hand me the chaos and I will perfect it for distribution?
Totally the latter. It's
okay.
Very much, please give me it and I'll do what I can. And to be honest, there's a checklist in the sense that, the way D&D adventures are written, the way you sort of present different rooms and creatures and things, so very tiny details really that we try to keep consistent from one adventure to another. Beyond that, I really like that they tend to be very different. So, you can get the trilogies that we put up, for example. You get one adventure and you get the next one. It's totally different. Not necessarily in tone, but in structure and the way it's presented. So I like that variety between them. And one thing I should mention, by the way, when speaking of feedback, is that we need to give a huge shout out to all Kickstarter backers who send us feedback about the adventures, because that's such an amazing thing. Every adventure we put out, we get loads of emails and contact over
and really clever questions. They're like, how does that work? I was like, that is a valid question. I will think about it and come up with a clever answer.
Yeah, my entire group has gone off and done this. Help me.
Cries in Winterhold's finest. Just
yeah.
We are definitely gonna get to that later in the conversation, because inquiring minds have some questions about that.
Yes, so many
questions. So we've talked about kind of like your overall process. Like, you start here, you work your way through, refining as you go till release. As a part of that, because we're talking about foreshadowing, right? Narrative threads, how it all ties back together. My question to the both of you is, how soon are you dropping clues, dropping hints, and like at what frequency through your different acts are you trying? Like, is there a calculation, or is it kind of a feeling thing? How do you begin the art of narrative threading?
When I write mysteries, I tend to think, I tend to sort of like, this is the story, this is what's happening, this is where the characters are going to be. So more in a location based, where are they and what does a time scale look like? And then I figure out which are my clues. And so there's two things you can do. First of all, if you place a clue very early in the adventure, merely before people really realize it's an adventure, you can get away with almost anything. Because people are like, oh, this is random. Readers, and in books as well, you are more open to things that happen for no apparent reason, like a random happening. You're just meeting this strange wizard. That's fine. But you would never accept meeting the strange wizard in Act 3. Because that's when the story sort of is narrowing down. And it's neat to have that sort of build-up where a clue can be very ambiguous as well in the first act or early in the story, where you go like, this is weird, or it doesn't make any sense. And then later when you get the next clue, you realize that what the first one actually meant, and things like that. So I tend to have like 3 or 4 clues, and I sort of spread them out through the adventure, not too close and not too far away either. And then when it comes to hiding clues, it depends a little bit on one way of doing it, for example, as a sort of like trick, smoke and mirrors, is to present a list. You find all of these things at the desk at the strange lord, whatever. And then you list one thing in the middle, which was the clue. And people will miss that because they're like, blah, 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 blah. Oh, but that quill was really important, actually. And if you look closely, you would notice that it's poisoned. So things like that. So yeah, that's what I do.
Awesome.
I have a question related to these like clues and people finding collections of things that they're supposed to. It kind of ties into Erik's comment about the Kickstarter. What happens when players do go so far off track that they, and I'm definitely speaking from very related experience, where they completely miss all relevant clues and all the things that you meant for them to find? Like, how do you usually account for it, like narratively, in the writing process when you're trying? Do you put a lot of effort into, if they completely miss A, B, and C, there is still D over here that they can find? Or do you just hope that the DM is able to think on their feet?
Well, to be fair, I try not to, I leave that pretty much up to the DM. Sometimes I'll give examples for like, this is the suggestions that the DM can do. Mainly if a story slows down, you can add these random encounters or speed things up, or the person with the highest intelligence check will suddenly realize that,
Yeah.
Or you just go like, sometimes as a DM as well, you just have to wait your players out. They'll search a room, they didn't find anything, they search the other room. Eventually they're going to look in the attic or the cellar, so that's something that I leave up to the DM pretty much. And then, sometimes it depends a little bit, like the Before the Stroke of Midnight's mystery. There are several things to solve, but you might not solve all of it. You might not figure out who is the heir to Shrewsbury Castle, and that's fine because you still got the murderer. So it works anyway, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I don't really write that in. I leave that to the DM because it's their story and their narrative, and they will play with a group. I mean, some groups are super clever and super sort of focused, and others are more like, well, ale at the tavern and go and look for clues. It just depends on the group, really.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned, I want to kind of take a pause here and talk about some of the adventures that you've written. There's 6 total, is that correct? Am I remembering right? Like trilogy ones on your site?
There's 6 that we've run. Hang on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Should I run through?
We've run kicks. Let's see, we've done 6 Kickstarters, 2 of
That's
which
what I-
are.
yeah, okay.
One was sort of a relaunch of the very first one. The most recent one was a relaunch of the very first trilogy, which is updated with new art, new content, and now available, or soon available in print. And there is an adventure trilogy that we never had a Kickstarter for, which is out on Drive-Thru RPG.
As PDFs.
Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome.
So the whole thing looks like this. First, we have Hunter's Full Moon, 3 adventures set in the wilderness. Then you can do a murder mystery called Old Wolf Inn, Murder at Old Wolf Inn. Then you can run a new trilogy called Secrets of the Drow. Then you can go and find out what happened to A.V. Ashwood, if you like to, also murder mystery. Then you'll do Rise of the Ice Dragon trilogy, also trilogy, obviously, because it's called trilogy. And then you do Before the Stroke of Midnight, and after that you do Prophecy of Nine Members.
That's awesome.
But,
They all kind of feed together. I'd forgotten we also did the Murder at the Wolf Inn. That was our introduction, or at least my introduction to the content that you guys make, and it was truly a phenomenal jump into.
We literally didn't solve the mystery.
Oh no! By the end, my character was literally standing on a table, screaming and pointing, and it was just it was a whole debacle. And it kind of goes back. I know Purple posted this in the chat as well, of things going the unexpected direction and relying on the GM ways of accounting for that. And then Proper mentioned, NPCs offering like helpful tips and everything like that. I know as GMs we have to be creative in the way that we swap clues around. Like Luka's no stranger of browbeating players with
Sometimes you have to.
Yeah, like, I promise you this thing is not important. Turn this way. Just look this way.
Over here you will find.
Yep, absolutely. Let's see. And then I know we've got some other questions from members of the TPK community that they submitted in advance. We also have a reminder to chat. Feel free to ask questions as we're having the conversation, because we are keeping an eye out there as well. I mean, let's just get into it. Let's talk A.V. Ashwood, or the Murder at the Wolf Inn. Did you watch any of TPK's playthrough of the adventure? Were you able to catch any part of it?
I didn't have time to watch it when it was running, but I did catch it on YouTube, so I've seen it. So you've seen, I don't know what you've seen.
Almost up to the very end. And you are responsible for making me ache with laughter in the exchange you had with the animals. When you can't speak with animals in the basement.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Outstanding.
Turk's a fast thinker with those voices. I think he broke all of us a little bit. Oh, it was so, I mean, was there anything there, I mean, talking about the unexpected, was there anything through it with our playthrough that made you go, oh, well, that's a thing that can happen? I mean, I guess speak to animals, but...
Yeah, I didn't have that, for example. And it actually kind of changes a lot, because I thought about it, it's like, oh, what's going on here? Oh, improvement. Oh, I like it. But it actually does change the player's perception of Avi. So when they meet her later on, they are not as, can I use the word forgiving here? It's more like, bash her over the head, over the shoulder, off we go. It's not like, oh, we have to save her. It's like, no, she tortured animals. Like, oh, really what she was doing? I don't know. She was just a curious scientist. That could happen to anyone. Yeah. Not lifting at herself. So yeah, but that was one thing. And that's a little bit what I mean. We write the adventures like, here you go. But then it's up to the DM and to the players to create their own story. This is more like a framework for a story, but it's not going to be the same story every time, because it's going to be different depending on who's playing and what's your how much have you played, or what type of group do you have. Do you have a more dynamic group, or which is more sort of like kick in the door and find stuff out, or is it more like we need want to think about this and go and talk to all of the NPCs. So it really depends.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question submitted by Turk, the GM of that. He, and I'm sure you didn't include it for the animals, but he was going to ask, he wanted us to ask, what inspired the process of writing your NPCs with the what they know, what they hide, what they lie about, which, as someone who runs a lot of pre-written adventures, that's such an excellent thing to include for your NPCs, even if you didn't think to do it for the animals, or in some cases with me, the plants. That's been a thing.
Oh yeah.
That was, I think it was mainly, I just needed to organize it myself, and then later on it just sort of followed through the adventure, and I realized it's actually quite good, because it's like, if you are checking the book, and it's late and you're tired and so on, like, I go and talk to that NPC, and it's just good to sort of like, okay, that person is going to lie about this. So you get that sort of, it might look a little bit potentially boring in the text, because it is, a repetition for all of the NPCs. On the other hand, it's really easy to find that information because otherwise you have to flick through the pages or the PDF, and you're like, oh, I don't really remember. And then you make it up as you go, and that could work, but it could also not work. So, yeah.
As a note-heavy GM, I've never actually, I think once, as like a fun one-off, I ran a written adventure, but I do homebrew almost exclusively, and so like that organization in notes, like as I've been writing, has always been like, gotta get it down, because exactly like, oh crap, what do they say, like scroll, look, search. So I think having that structure as like a GM, holy cow, game changer for sure, to just have that at your disposal, to know immediately, here's my motivations, and I'm not just he thinks about his life really hard, and what's over there, like
transfers and whatever, to the point. And I think that's why I wrote it like that initially, and then when I handed it over to Erik, he's like, oh, actually this looks kind of clever, and I think you kept it.
It made a lot of sense to me when I read it, and it really comes for me, my fascination with NPCs out of Strat. Going back to that, because he's such a character in so many ways. It's like, yes, he's multidimensional, and he's got so much going on that you can really embody him as a DM and just run with him. Whereas many other NPCs, not necessarily in Curse of Strat, but in other adventures, they're sort of left hanging. They have maybe some things motivating them, but not enough, at least for me, to really, get the puppet, the hand in the puppet, and really enact them. So when you added those extra bits, what are they keeping secret? Those small things, I think they help all the NPCs come alive, which is key in the mystery adventure.
Yeah, I was just gonna tack on to that. I mean, so you write out these definitions, and as we're talking like foreshadowing and stuff, how much, like if we're talking percentages, how much does the personality of the NPC play into what you're building out, and do you have a favorite kind of NPC to put into your mysteries? Is like sneaky, half
unhelpful.
Yes,
those are my favorite kind.
I think it I'm just going to answer the second question, because that's one when it comes to favorite NPCs, I think you always have a couple of them, like, well, this is I like characters who seem to be one thing, but they're not. They have a little bit of layering. But when it comes to the NPCs in the stories, they tend to sometimes just steal the narrative completely. So it's like, what are you doing? They're like, well, you brought me to life, so suck it up. And then they just change the story and everything, and you have to go back and rewrite it. And that's usually okay. It can freak me out a little bit, because I go like, this is not what I planned. It's not according to the system. But if you roll with it, they tend to sort of like, oh, actually, this makes sense, and the ending is, you know, darker or better or whatever. It just, once they have their own sort of their own life, they start doing things like Felder, for example. I had never planned that he would give away the crossbow at the end of the adventure, but he does, because it's like he's finally realizing what his niece actually means to him. So it's like, and he's not going to be in the shadow of his pesky brother anymore. So it's like, you know what? Here, take it. And that's part of his little story journal that no one might not care about, but I do. So that's, yeah.
No, I think as a GM, NPCs are one of the greatest assets you have, and I love that you're making the point. They kind of, you made me. You gotta suck it up and deal with this, because this is my story, and how it does kind of just emerge from the creative ether to drive your story in unexpected directions, and then you get to introduce them to, you know, characters like Luka's Johnny, and then it's just like, oh no, we're not going that direction, we're going a totally different direction, because they're now engaging with a personality that's unaccounted for, or just how you watch it just grow and spiral out in a different direction. It's honestly one of the best parts of GMing is those so good. I love it.
My love for Kale burns on.
Oh, Kale was a delightful NPC, because he was just shady, but we were convinced that he was shady in our behalf almost. So when there was the betrayal, we were like, just the shocked Pikachu face of like, how could you?
Yeah.
Well, I think very much he was supposed to be, from what I understood, and of course I'm on the player side of the table, but I think he was very much supposed to be a red herring type of NPC, where he wasn't actually related to the murder at the inn, but he was a shady character, and so but I just kind of latched on because I think it was like the one good role I had all night of like investigating. And so it's like, this is my new buddy. I'm here, and Kale is all I care about. I had to like escape via a window or something. Turk had him just leave, so we would leave him alone.
He just left. Just straight up left. And Erik, you had mentioned Strahd and how he's such a fun character kind of fall into. Would you, as far as like NPCs go, do you prefer like the townsperson regular NPC, or like the more villainy trope? Which are more fun?
The more fun ones are the ones that are conflicted. So they are caught between maybe being villains and some other drive. So they're somehow stuck in the middle, or they're just ambiguous. So that would be my go-to. There's one particular NPC we've been writing about recently in the adventures we're creating now, and not the ultimate big bad villain, who's very interesting too, at least to me, because there's certain motivations steering her different directions there. But this one is really caught in the middle, really conflicted, and it's going to be very unclear as a player whether or not you can trust this particular NPC. And that is the most fun to write and the most fun to play as a GM or meet as a player. I think anyone that keeps you on your toes. Yeah.
I feel like a lot of your NPCs are very ambiguous. They both have the, oh yes, they're good, but then you actually get to know them and it's like, oh no, maybe they are not. And I have a question here, I think from Turk again, which is, have you had any experience like with playthroughs or playtesting where just there was no trust given to any of your NPCs? Yeah, okay. just absolutely, we don't trust any of these people. We will not engage. No.
So one thing we've done on several occasions and more recently is that I am part of the playtesting group. So I know nothing about the adventure that we eventually are going to publish, because it comes all from you. So you run it as a GM and I sit in with the group. So, and they don't think that I don't know anything, but it's true. So we played Before the Stroke of Midnight, and you.
Don't spoil.
No, I'm not going to
If
spoil.
people haven't seen it.
No, I don't know spoil. So eventually, in that adventure, you arrive at a castle. Let's do it again. There's a castle in the picture, and you do meet a large like a real gallery of NPCs, and you know pretty quickly that one is really shady here. But you meet them, and we as a group were like, okay, well, hello, right, hi, yeah, and then we sort of did a scrum. We sort of huddled together. It's like, okay, we can't trust any of these people. We need to get out of here. So we fled the castle and you stood in the woods like, well, do we even dare go back in? So that happens.
Trust issues.
Yeah.
Sad childhood.
And if I can spin on this, like one type of feedback that we received multiple times is that you have people who bought your adventures, or they join the Kickstarter, and they expect a monster hotel, and they get this weird, strange, mystery-based adventure, and they said it's the most fun they have because suddenly all the players are on the toes. Like, what's going on here? It's no longer a case of I slam the door open and it's down to tactics. It's more like I'm surrounded by creepy people. What's happening?
Or creepy things in jars.
In jars.
Mm-hmm. How quickly you can turn to teamwork when you're surrounded by eyeballs and spider legs, right? It's less about, well, I want to punch this thing, and more like, how do we get out? Like, it's just tell me where we need to go. I want to get out. Go for it.
Oh, I was just gonna ask. Speaking of being surrounded by a cast of off-putting NPCs, what inspired the creation of the Council of Cats? Where did this come from? And do you are they going to be returning in future adventures? Like, just tell me about the Council of Cats.
Well, so there is a character called Octavia Dragonborn that she's never really been in any of the adventures, but she's mentioned like small Easter eggs because I can't help myself. So, and she's like pretty much like a female Elminister, but maybe with a little bit of dubious character. Anyway, so she had this tower where she was conducting magical experiments and just generally learning more about magic. And because magic, in my mind, it kind of leaks a little bit like radiation. So if you do it a lot, and if you do it in the same place, it's going to have an impact on the area, or in this case, to her cats. Eventually, Octavia left. Some say got kicked out of the town. Unknown. Others say that she just left. But the cats remained, and they just got really, really clever. So, and I was like, what would clever cats do? They would start bullying all the dogs, obviously, and start plotting and planning to take over the world. That's what I would do if I were a cat. And yeah, they sort of ganged up to this counseling, and they use information. So they answer questions because, cats are everywhere, no one cares. So they're gathering information, and then they, in return, when you ask questions, they will ask you questions that they can use later on, either to sort of like, so that's the person you really care about. Interesting. Or it's like, we don't know anything about these weird twins. We need to know more about that. So they gather information for their own sort of nefarious purposes, like cats are known to do.
It's true.
Accurate.
It's true. I know in playing your adventures, because there's groups like the Council of Cats, and there's several other factions in your adventures. When you're writing those out, and particularly like in the larger piece, we've talked a little bit about NPC motivations and embedding clues and information there. I mean, the faction level is like, that's taking it again a step up. So now you have individuals, but you also have groups, right, with their purposes and how they want to lead the story. Is it a similar approach, just at the higher level of group, when you're trying to like write out well, you've got these adventurers and they're coming in here, and well, this group's either gonna not like them or like them. Is it different than just individual NPCs at that point? Or how is it different?
I think that the groups are more connected to the world building in itself. So you will have, the thieves guilds, or the library in Northwind Gate. So they're more sort of connected to the actual town, and the town in its. So part of this world. Okay, so let's start from the beginning here. So the entire world was created by me. Like 20 years ago or something, when I was on a remote island with no internet connection and no computers. It's like, what should I do? I know, obviously, it's going to start writing on the world and put pieces together, because we've been playing in this area, and I was like, how is this actually connected to each other? So I started building this world, and every time someone made a new character, I was like, what's your name? Where are you from? And they're like, I don't know. I was like, well, you have to come up with a town. So we created the entire fairway. And then later on, we sort of more detailed. We have 2 maps. One of them is lost, and the other one has a lot of coffee on it. But the maps, and as well, if someone else is DMing, they're like, well, you come to a tower. I'm like, where is it? Show it on the map. So part of this Eastern Fairway is our world that we have been gaming in for nearly 2 decades. That's why I know it so incredibly well. So I'm like, well, obviously Hammersong and Coppertown, they don't get along, and you have these different areas, and then within the towns you will have different groups, and they are competing with each other in various ways. And that's when you just break it down to that. You break it down to the NPCs, and then you can sort of figure out how would this NPC or this Thieves Guilds react to this group when they arrive to this town. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yes, no, it does, because you're looking at it through the wider lens, right? The actual world, and it's a different kind of, like, I think the challenge with GMing and with writing in general is trying to figure out how all the pieces fit together, because it's like a puzzle, but it's a multiple layered puzzle. Like, it's pieces on top of pieces, right? Having your foundation, so you're able to like give, like, what kind of person would join the Thieves Guild, but like if the Thieves Guild has this motivation and then we have this, and how layered it can be. And when you're first GMing, it can be really intimidating. Like, it can be like, crap, like, like it's a lot to try and sort through. And as you start writing, it's like, oh dang, now I gotta figure out, where are you from, what does this building look like, all of the things, so I mean, from that lens, do you have any tips for new GMs who are trying to write their own stuff of where to begin, so they don't just go, well, this is too hard?
So I think I have 2 tips at the top of my mind. First off is start small, don't start in the main, we spent ages when we were sort of like, we want to go to what's the name, that we didn't even get to that big town. Forgotten Realms. All the adventures were like small little villages, and we never really arrived to the big town because no one really knew what the big town looked like. So I would say start small. Start in an inn or a small village, a small place where you can figure out who is the mayor or the elder or whatever, and a couple of NPCs around it. A tavern perhaps, a stable lad. So start small and then continue building the world, because it will come, if you just keep to a logical pattern, it will build itself after a while. And here's the secret tip. You don't actually need to know everything. You just need to show that little tip of the iceberg, and then the players will go like, that's interesting. And they will, sometimes when we playtest adventures, the players have better ideas than I do. I was like, I'm stealing that for sure. That's totally the way it was. So it's just, you just need to show that little part, but it's good to sort of think a little bit about what type of world is this. For our world is quite like a Norse world where magic isn't that entirely common, but it does exist. But do you have that feeling of, wilderness and unexplored large areas of nature where anything can happen. And then you just sort of add old ruins and old things that people don't know what it is. And you don't have to know it either. You can just sort of like, I don't know, it's written in Draconic. And then someone's like, I know how to read Draconic. I was like,
dang it.
well, sadly, it's so weird, so you can't actually read it. Yeah, it says something about matches, you're not sure. Old ancient, you just take it out. It will work.
Erik, you got any quick tips?
And I think you covered it with the last bit. To get comfortable as a GM to improvise, because it's really easy to. You have the foundation, and then you improvise, and then you use what you said in that spur of the moment, offhand comment, and then like, okay, I'm keeping that, but I'm not keeping that. Players will be forgiving anyway, because you are in control as a GM of your world. And if you happen to add something at a particular moment that you don't necessarily like, why did I put a clown in there? You should not have clowns in there. You just remove the clown later on, and the players go, what are the clowns here? And they go,
you're like, you had really strong bash brew that
exactly.
evening, so you're not entirely sure. Could it
long night at the end. You grab those clowns, move on. So you're in charge as a GM.
But do take notes. That would be another tip. Sort of like, so if you name the innkeeper, you go like, oh, his name is nah. And you look sort of like Feldore, and yep, that's his name. And then people go like, I'll go and talk to the innkeeper. What's his name again? And you're like, I'm ready. And then someone goes, wasn't it something with F? And you're like, oh, looking in your
Goes by many names.
Yes.
Name generator.
Sometimes he's known by this. He has a nickname that is this as well.
Sometimes he's not even there. There's someone else working there. So yeah.
We had a question from Proper, and you touched on it a little bit. But in chat, Proper asked, what part does collaborative storytelling take in your adventures? Like, how much do you give your players autonomy to develop the world around them? Like you were saying, like you'll kind of fill in, show them the tip of the iceberg, and allow them to kind of provide their own, like, oh, I know what's going on here. But do you have them actually develop the world with you? And does that make it into your adventures?
Yes, absolutely. A lot of things where people go like, I'm going to go and have a look. Is there a church here? It's like, I don't know, which type of church are you looking for? So yeah, that's one way of doing it. If they want to look at for a specific church, or you can just add that, and then later on you go like, there's a ship church in Whiteport. There's someone working there called whatever, so that's a great way. And that's what I meant when I said this is a world that, part of it is I wrote it, but a lot of it is from the players as well. You just start adding that. And I think it's nice also, especially for new players, where they go like, they're new and they're not really sure. And it's just nice to say, it's like, where are you from? Are you from your character is, did you grow up in a mining village? Are you from a big city? These type of questions will give the players a way of sort of like, oh, actually, I'm from is there a university town? Or whatever it is they want to have. And you just go, yes, there is. The trick is to say, yes, there is, and then add it to your world, and then take full credit for it, obviously.
That's the key part right there.
I absolutely love that, because, and I think particularly with narrative threads and stuff too, is I've said this before, I'm a strong believer that players show you the more interesting parts of your story. Like you can write a thing and be like, this is great, and here's all the parts that are important, and then your players come in and go, I don't care about that, I want to look over here, and you go, oh my gosh. And giving them that control, I want to look for this church here. They're interested in that. You can move your clue, your hint, your whatever to a place that they are like just genuinely interested in. And now again, to your point, it feels like it was meant to be all along. Like giving them that control actually helps you when developing, the intrigue, the mystery, this overall story. You can just swap pieces instead of, I think sometimes it can be, again, a little intimidating because it's like, oh crap, now I have to write this whole church and this whole new storyline. No, you don't. Just burp. Like we're just moving. Plug and play.
Yes.
No, I agree, and I think that's a part where you sort of like the DM's role is to sort of present the adventure. This is what you're doing. This is, you're meeting two trolls or whatever. But it's also part of storytelling. But letting the players be part of that world is really rewarding as a DM as well. Plus, when you don't have any more ideas, they start to make their own adventures. You can just tag along. So it works the other way around. But giving them that, because it's kind of boring if you have a player who will actually say, well, I'm going to go to this church to pray for my fallen friend, and you just go, there are no churches. But I'm in a big town, shouldn't there be a shrine? No. That would just be mean and stupid, so take the opportunity. And you can just go like, well, if it's a little bit often, like, is there an evil shrine to Zurich? Like, maybe not inside town, but there is a weird place where you have heard. And then later you just use that as a plot hook for something else. So invite your players to create the world together with you. And if they don't like the world, then you can blame it on them as well. So that's like an extra bonus. So.
I love it. It's well, you made it. This is on you.
When it's good, I will take credit. When it's bad, it's all your fault. You did this to yourself.
Exactly.
No, I love the providing the framework. I feel like sometimes I used to, when I first started DMing, I would almost over prep. And lately I've gotten way more comfortable with, here is the framework. I will lay it out, because most of the time we're not going to go all the way through these points anyways. They're going to go off in this direction I haven't even seen. So here's the framework, and I'll let them just kind of fill it in. And it's very much like I can just sit back and then occasionally try to murder them. But they fill in the rest of the plot and adventure themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. And for a long time, the way I wrote adventures were like, shit, are we gaming tonight? Who's the DM? Is that me? And it's like, okay, well, I need 3 quick monsters and a trap. Have at it, And then eventually they will sit in a tavern and they will start getting bored and they will find adventure, You just go like, we thought you heard someone talking about trolls. You're like, trolls? Okay, excellent. You just need to, sometimes it's fine to let the players be a little bit bored, because then they will definitely just chomp on anything that you show them. So that works as well. But for a long time, it's like 3 types of monsters, 1 trap. Mm-hmm. Treasure, if someone needs to increase the level, it's like, oh yeah, you find some money as well.
Yeah,
maybe.
So.
I think it's so important. I think again, because GMing can be such a, like, I want to run a game, and then you jump in and you're like immediately overwhelmed, keeping in mind just how simple the building blocks can be so you can build towards the layered world and plot and NPC motivations as we go. I'm just gonna check the time just really quick here. Yep, we've been going for about an hour. So we're going to take a quick break. While we're gone, chat, feel free to post any questions. We're going to kind of turn more into kind of a loose conversation. So anything you would like to ask Tove and Erik, let us know. And refill your coffee, take a walkabout, and we will be right back. And we're back. Thanks for hanging in with us. We are here with Midnight Tower, Erik and Tove, and we're talking about narrative threads and the art of foreshadowing. And I believe Luka has another question queued up for us.
Yeah, I am just gonna launch right in, just because this is something as a GM I feel like I struggle with or come across a lot. Are there any moments that when you were writing them, you thought were gonna be huge? Like, this is gonna be the thing. This is a thing that I've developed in my mind. I've spent a lot of time on this. And then it never went off, never got engaged with. For whatever reason, it's just not something that seems to stand out to anyone but you.
Yeah, that happens all the time. And that's fine. I usually just recycle it as like eventually. I think it depends a little bit on build-ups. So, and that's something that you can do if you're running like a campaign or a trilogy of adventure where you sneak things in. So I had one adventure that a tiny, it's like a mini adventure. But for several sessions, like every time when they were doing something, or every now and then, one of the characters had a feeling that someone was watching him. I was always like, run a perception or whatever. And then later that day or night, they would be attacked by undeads that would look a little bit different than your average undeads. So I did that for 3 times. And every time when they tracked these undeads, it ended up in this teleportation circle that was just fading away. So when that finally, I was like, today it's happening, I'm gonna run my little, finally they're gonna step through the portal. But for some reason, probably me, I didn't really explain it. So I was like, there's a teleportation and it's shimmering. And the place were like, well, all right, yeah, okay. Should we go back into the inn? And I was like, oh, okay. I did not see that one coming. Maybe I was just one super excited about this adventure. Okay, farewell, dungeon. We're doing something else. And then eventually I was like, okay. So they were sort of talking about going back to the inn and, taking watch and stuff. And I was like, so you're not actually stepping through the portal? And they're like, wait, is that open? And I was like, yeah, it's been open all the time, but it is fading. And then they just completely jumped on it. So that's something that you sometimes you're like, really? I spent 3 sessions taunting you with undead zombies and beholder zombies and skeleton minotaurs, and you just go, who cares? But that was, from my part, where I wasn't clear of what I actually meant with it. And they were so used to that they come to this teleportation and it's just shimmering and fading out. So they added it's fading out, but it was actually still open. So that's one example where you can just sort of increase the motivation or just describe it a little bit more carefully. So
I will say this though, because I was part of the play. I was playing in the playtesting group through all of these instances where these undead, the strange undead creatures showed up. And I believe our group was about level 3 when they started showing up. And the first one we met was an undead beholder. Now, my character would have no idea what a beholder is. A big floating eye, it's going to die. As a player, you know what a beholder is. And like, what?
Surprise!
So you get when you have an opportunity to go down and confront this, whoever's after us, you go very carefully. But I can give you another example too, which was to me a lesson also in how adventures can play out in very different ways. And that is, I keep coming back to Spread. It's because it's probably the longest campaign I've ever.
What you're gonna say?
Yeah. So obviously with Strad, because when I read through the module and I found Death House, okay, we're definitely having Death House in here because this is awesome. Even though the characters were theoretically too high level to actually have any problems with Death House, because I think you were like level 4 or 5 when you started. I didn't care. I was going to have Death House anyway. Now, obviously, the way the whole campaign is written, it's very sandboxy, as if you read it, you know. But
yes,
it's supposed to be a big escalation towards the final showdown with Strad, which is going to be the climax. So you sort of get Death House out of the way, and then you play and play and play.
We nearly died in Death House.
Yes, this is the thing. What happened was the adventure, the campaign, got completely turned on its head. Death House took forever because, for whatever reason,
we came up with this clever idea that you tried as well. I know, let's split up the party. You start from up there, and you go in there. We tried the pinching move. It's a really shitty idea.
Yeah,
So,
no, that's not a good look.
It was prolonged, and people almost, and one person got possessed and tricked everyone into going back into the house by the time the house was running amok and was trying to chew people up. with having guillotines in all the windows.
But Nora, my character, my warlock, slapped that character hard, so he wasn't possessed anymore.
Punched the ghost out.
That's the achievement of Roleplay.
Amazing.
Yeah, I remember that. I think you knocked him out flat. So it was hilarious. It was pretty much the highlight of the entire campaign, what was meant to be a very brief introduction. Strat, when we finally meet him, because I was dead set to run this adventure by the book, because I wanted to give that a go. So whatever happened, I was not going to step in and take control so much of events. I was going to follow the book. When they met Strat, I would role-play him, but they would meet him the way the sort of adventure was written, which includes rolling on the random encounter table. So these guys sort of blunder into Ravenloft and find their way into the kitchen pretty much immediately because they were having none of this shenanigans. And I rolled on the because I'd also written out in between to roll for this random encounters and immediately rolled a 20 or 1, I can't remember, for Strat. So they slammed the kitchen door open and there is Strat. And we rolled initiative and he ends up last. He didn't stand a chance. He was annihilated in a single round.
No.
Yeah, because by that time we had the Sunblade.
I had never done everything by the book because we're so freaked out about that death house. We're like, we're gonna find out everything, and we did, except the poor, the guy I sent to hell instead of. He was apparently an NPC that you were supposed to join forces with, but I didn't really know that, and I thought. My character thought he was really whiny about how he was trapped in the attic. And as a friendly warlock...
You're kicking him to...
Well, I thought that, he wanted to leave and I wanted a favor. So that worked out really well. Except, of course, he was meant to be rather important.
He was... It
worked. Yeah. Well, I wanted my soul back. That was before I got my soul back. So that's...
Yeah.
I blame it on that.
It can happen to anyone. So it was strange, but it also taught me a lesson. Like you can't really set these things up. You can try to, and to me that suggested that if you really want the encounter with Strad to be the final things, and you are playing it by the book, you need to take him. Well, you can't play it by the book. You need to sort of put safety mechanisms in place, make sure you don't run into weird things, and that's something we do. Sometimes.
So, and for example, when we did Frozen Labyrinths, we have a random where you sort of like roll for where this orbstone is. And one group just sort of like, well, okay. So they went into this amazing Frozen Labyrinth and just found the orbstone directly. They're like, okay, now what?
Yeah.
It's like, I didn't really think that through. But I think that's where the DM can decide a little bit, again, as a freedom, as a DM. It's like, do I want this story to continue? Then they won't find it there. They will just find it somewhere else. Same thing with Strad. You could have said, he kind of poofs into a smoke cloud.
Yeah.
I mean,
we would have bought that completely. Because we were like, really, we just killed Strad in his own kitchen.
Yeah,
why?
I think you might have run the most legendary Curse of Strahd ever, because you literally walk in as he's just like in the fridge, like pulling out a sandwich. Like it's how I just immediately wipe the floor with him. Like it's just there is the comedic just level of amazing that is to close out a Barovian horror campaign. Like I slow clap, like that is but I think that that's, and Erik, you kind of talked about it, you can try to make these elements be big and meaningful, but really you're just along for the ride too, like it just depends where you end up, and not being so committed. If you are committed, making that plan up front, but like gosh dang, what a wonderful story. Like
exactly.
It's such a climactic anticlimax.
Yeah. I don't think it wouldn't make a good movie, so it was brilliant. We were like, we're the heroes, let's go and get more stuff. Just sort of went through that and died like, stuff of power, of course, awesome. It was great, But I don't think that was exactly what the writers had actually planned. And that's fine. Again, so it's just the framework, and as long as everyone is enjoying themselves, the story can just roll out the way it wants. And same thing with dice roll. I mean, if you're unlucky, you will have a TPK situation if you have monsters who are at a reasonable level. That can happen, and then you can have sort of like, what will happen now? Is it time to start building a new group, or should they return, or whatever you want? But I think to have that sort of flexibility, that is part of the great game, really, because it's not a computer game where it's sort of like, oh, time to do this and pick 20,000 Netherwood or get my stuff or whatever. It is a different type of dynamics, and we should all just embrace the madness. So yeah.
Like I said,
The flexibility is important.
Yeah, because I wouldn't do it the same way again. I immediately felt, right, can we do this all over? Can we just go back to the beginning and I can do this properly? Because now I've tried to find the book, I'm doing it differently. No? Okay, never mind.
Right.
But
I'm running Curse of Strahd for the third time now. You cannot run it rules as written and have any sort of challenge, I think, for the players. I always joke that there's no such thing as balance in D&D. It's a myth, because you will come in, and I do this all the time, where I'm like, well, this is just gonna wipe them out. I maybe went too hard here. Like, I sure hope they survive. And then players being players, they're so much more clever than I give them credit for, I think. Or that stat blocks give them credit for. And then there's always the dice where it's like, well, I'm last in initiative, or, oh, I didn't think of this. And they just mop the floor with what should have been an absolute TPK. So I very much embrace the GM cheating, where it's just like, yes, they suddenly have this HP, or, oh, they went through that bad guy. The rest of these guys are so much tougher than that guy. He was just the test.
Well, and I want to clue into something that kind of combining all of these things, like something Tove said, where it was, it's not a video game, it's different, and embracing that, like, that pivot and that, that willingness to just go in a different direction and embrace how just buck wild it can really get, and like in preserving, with those narrative threads and keeping the tension, keeping what you want, like not being afraid to, well, actually, this is what happens, and I think the players too, kind of setting that expectation up front. This is what we're going to try and do, because players want to be able to do badass stuff, you know what I mean? Like, how badass is it? Like, yeah, no, I killed Strahd in his pajamas. Like, that's like, that's next level. That's tier. Right? Yeah. Oh, that guy, you go on, oh yeah, Strahd, he was no big deal. And I want to tie it back into a question we got from chat and Purple, because we were talking about these big moments and how they can, like fall flat. But what about when you're trying to go and you're trying to foreshadow and hint, and the player just immediately goes, I know what that is, and it kind of like start unraveling your story before it even starts, you know what I mean? Like, how do you pivot there? Because it's almost like the opposite, right? Where it's just like, okay, I'm going and I'm being very mysterious, and they're like, no, you're not.
I have it all figured out. This is what's happening, guys.
Yeah.
All right, you ready? And it's like, so much planning, and it's all ruined.
Yep.
I think sometimes you should just give them a little bit sort of like, you just roll a couple of dice behind the screen. You're like, oh, are you sure you're really going to go and talk to them? Okay. So you have that sort of like, that's your funeral attitude. Or like, well, or they hear some strange rumors that seems to sort of might not actually, you just give them something, or leave them, because eventually someone will say, especially if it's a murder, they're like, actually I don't think it is that person, it's too obvious. It's probably like this, and they come up with this sort of other story. You're like, okay, I'm totally taking notes of that and that and that, and then later on we'll feed in a clue that seems to sort of support that red herring idea that I didn't think about, but the players did. So you can sort of steal their ideas a little bit. But usually, I think for my part, when it comes to murder mysteries, it's a little bit like Agatha Christie mystery, where you go like, it is that person, and then you were like, actually, it seems to be that person. No, wait, it was a gardener. And then you can be right, it was that person. And everyone is quite happy. You're like, you feel clever because you figure it out, although you were also kind of, it could have been these two others. And that's fine. I think if it's too obvious, then, that happens, And I know that there was someone who just, in one of our adventures, go like, hang on, and they just nailed it, mainly out of sort of, that just makes sense. And I'm like, tip my hat to you. Maybe you should change career and become a detective or something. Some people are just very intuitive or just very sort of glued up on seeing patterns and seeing things. And, more kudos to them. Then again, if you are smarter than your character, you should roleplay that. Same thing, if your character are braver or more stupid than you are, roleplay that. So even if you as a player, you can actually sort of say like, oh, maybe it isn't actually, I'm not really sure. You can lean into that and just make sure that everyone has a nice evening, and the DM doesn't have to go, okay, 10 minutes, I need to come up with a new adventure. Although that can happen, and that's okay. So, yeah.
You mentioned Agatha Christie, and like clearly Luka and I are somewhat inspired by Neil Gaiman. Amazing. So I want to ask, who are some of your muses in the writing space? Like who do you like read and you go, that's the kind of stories that I want to tell?
That's a good question.
I think for my part, it depends. I tend to read books in sort of, for example, what happened to J.R.R. Ashford, we had been role-playing Call of Cthulhu for quite some time. And I was like, I really want to try to make a Call of Cthulhu Dungeons and Dragons adventure. And Erik, we can run a Kickstarter with it. And Erik was really poorly and had like high fever, and he was just delirious. He's like, yes, whatever you want.
Yes.
So that's how what happened to J.R.R. Ashford sort of came to be. So for my part, it's mainly, I think everyone has their favorites. I have old school sort of fantasy, and then I do sort of draw a lot of information and inspiration from history, but also just from things that we have in our world today that you can sort of use and borrow and change a little bit, so it works better in a medieval setting. But yeah, so if you read something in the news about Mongolian sky burials, steal that and add it to your world and start asking questions. Who would have the sky burials? How does that work? And, things that has to do with science. It's like, if that was magic, how would that work? Or, just sort of like alternative evolution. Ooh, interesting. Skeletons. Will they have exoskeletons if they're really large, or will they have a proper skeleton? So things like that.
Yeah. I'm trying desperately to think of something here because you put me on the spot. I'm like, surely I have.
I steal everything I watch. I'm like, everything. Yep. It's just nothing but plagiarism from all of my favorite movies and books and just all of it. It's like, this is mine now. This is mine. Anyone who watches or consumes all the same media I do, I feel like is able to, like, when being run through my stuff, they're like, oh, I know what she's doing. It's that one episode from Buffy. It's just
exactly. Yeah, but and I agree. And sometimes I'm like, well, it's Buffy, but it's also Charlotte Bronte with a dash of Anne Rice. How does that work? I would just call it Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah, exactly. So the campaign I ran on TPK was the Bard's Refrain, which was like pitched as kind of a music-centric like campaign where it's all based on like lyrics and stuff, but in the background we're actually running off of like Robin McKinley, Garth Nix, and anime plots. You know what I mean? I'm like, yeah, think that it's about the music. Like, it's just that's exactly what we're doing.
And I think, and again, it comes back to the sort of mind map when I write. I played a Feywild adventure lately, and I was like, how does Feywild work, and how will it work for me? And I was like, okay, looking at YouTube, not understanding anything, it seems really whimsical. How can I make an adventure with pixies? Honestly. no, back to the drawing board we go. And it wasn't until I was like, oh, hang on, it's like, I'm going to steal that from Alice in Wonderland. Totally. And that from, Brother Grimm, that will work. And that from like a Swedish folklore story that I've heard sometimes ages ago. And you just sort of mix it together. And then after a while, a little bit Cinderella and talking mice, because everyone likes talking mice. And obviously a paladin rabbit called Nostradamus makes perfect sense because we're in Feywild. So, and I think that's a good way of doing it. Sometimes you can just go, like you said, a Buffy episode or something where you go like, oh, that's a clever idea. How would it work if no one could speak? What would the spellcasters do then? You start with an idea, and then it's not plagiarism because you are turning it into your own idea. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that, again, it's proper put it in the chat. You're only as good as what you steal from, right? It's what inspires you, and you put your own little twist on it. And that's what I think is so great about Midnight Tower and what you guys are doing, is because you're saying, hey, here's our perspective. And then you mentioned earlier, and I would love to kind of hear some of the Kickstarter feedback, but as people run through your adventures, it's going to be totally different, right? Because everyone's bringing their backpack of favorite authors and their perspective and tweaking NPCs, in different ways. So I think, yeah, absolutely. It's amazing.
Yeah,
Go for it.
Go ahead.
Nope, you.
I was just going to mention the comment about like, this is science, but like, how would this look like if it's magic? I loved that, and that episode of Buffy where it's like where it's the gentleman and everyone's silent. The moment you said it, I'm like, I know that episode. But like, yeah, what spell would it be? I ran a very improv, just kind of diceless RPG using that. Like, everyone was like, well, let's just play something. It's like, I'll just kind of lead you through something right now. We don't have any dice or anything. Let's just go. And it was like, what do I do? We're just going to play Hush. That's what we're doing. And but yeah, it was very much like, how would this look like in a D&D setting? And like all of these like kind of more modern things, like, we joke all the time about like walkie-talkies are just sending stones, the science, but it's magic. I loved that comment.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a lot of my world building is based like that. So in real life, or from the beginning, before I started moving that I am a scientist. So I like to have that part where you go like, okay, there is magic, but there is also a real world. And I think that if you can definitely merge that together. And I'm not saying that, for those who want to have like flying elephants, you go, absolutely have that in your world. But I kind of like it when there is a structure, or when it's sort of like, okay, so it's like the monster in AVH, where I'm like, how would this actually work? Would it work? How much of this is just genetic manipulation, and how much of this is magic? And how can I make it Lovecraftian as well? And I might sometimes I write it all up, and people go like, oh, boring. And sometimes I go like, well, I knew how this works, and that's fine, But I like the approach, and I think that's part of at least for my part, why Eastern Faraway, our world, feels so real. Like part of Eastern Faraway is more real to me than part of the UK, which probably makes me sound crazy, and I'm fine with that. I can embrace it. But it just, that's world building for me. And I think that everyone's world it's not about this is right or this is wrong, but this is how I like to do it. And I encourage people to do it if they want to.
I love, because it's that thing of, I care about, like, as there's the different lenses, right? You've got player cares and you've got GM cares, but I love the point that you make of, if I care about it and I try to write it out and I make it make sense, it just gives everything more depth, right? It gives you more room to play and stuff, because now, okay, you have flying elephants, but how does that work? Was there some wizard that cursed elephants and they used like this combination of spells, and now, okay, now you've introduced a whole different concept, and now there's this mythical person out there just cursing elephants, like, you know, like, why? And it opens up this avenue. Like, the more you explain and the more you dive down in, it really fleshes out and gives you room to, like, and now we're just tying and introducing and mixing things together as we move forward in our campaign, one shot car ride, you know, adventure.
Yeah, and I think,
living world.
Yeah, and exactly. And if you look at things like Terry Pratchett's books, for example, you will have exactly that. What you mean? It's a disc and elephants and flying river. That makes no sense. But the rest of the world works, and that's why, as a reader, you're like, oh, no. You sort of, I don't want to say buy the concept, but you accept the world. Like, it could be our world, but with this extra, or Tolkien's world, which feels really alive because he's put so much effort into languages and people and all of that. So it's a little bit about, again, you don't need to write like full sort of Tolkien Lord of the Rings books, but it's nice to have that little feeling where this is how my world will work, because it will answer a lot of questions later on when people go like, is there a wizard school? You're like, is there? If you have a world where magic is, you know, illegal or tainted, or then no, there will be no wizard schools, or maybe there will be, but they will be underground or something. So it's easy for you to answer your questions and the players' questions later on. So it's a cheat trick where you can go like, I know my world, and therefore it's easy to populate it with NPCs and towns and adventures.
Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes too, like, how easy it can be, right? Is you say, I'm stating this as fact. Like, this is how my world works. Here's my fact. Here's my explanation. That's what it is. Like, we did a one-shot adventure, or I ran, and it was just totally random. I had no prep going in. We're just rolling on tables to make everything. And one of my favorite things to come out of it is they were collecting buckets for a bucket festival. And that's just the way it works. They went to a house. There was an old lady who tried to kill him. She was a bucket hag. Yep. Now there's bucket hags. Like, it's just like, and how much fun that is. Because I think sometimes we get like, okay, we're going to be all mysterious and we're going to get really into it. Sometimes it's fun to just have a bucket hag. And like,
yeah, absolutely.
And that's where your depth comes from.
Pond hags and stream hags in my world.
Yes.
Because, I mean, why wouldn't they? Sea hags, surely. I mean, if they are a territorial, if they don't want to hang out with others, where would they go? To a stream. Or, you know, just like you can have freshwater fishes, you should have freshwater hags. It makes sense in my world. So.
Yes, I think that's wonderful. I kind of wanted, we were moving into kind of the, we've talked about like one shots and other things. I would love to know, because you guys have true one shots, like we're one session adventures, and then you have your trilogy adventures. Can you talk about your approach and how they're different when you're writing them out? Like, do your trilogy start out as a one shot and then you go, no, there's more here? Kind of what's the plan and how are they different?
Well, the murder mysteries are always one shots. Sometimes you will have like a murder mystery element in a trilogy. That's not the same thing. So the mysteries are always meant to be like one story. And for my part, well, you are actually the writer when it comes to writing proper books. But for my part, I had to learn a lot about it. So I've mainly been reading books about screenwriting and pacing and first act and second act and third act and all of that. A lot of that kind of makes sense. And if you watch more than 3 movies, you will know that eventually the character will leave the village and go on a journey and eventually come back to the same village, and he has grown as a person. That's what we call the hero's journey. And everyone likes that because that goes back to the Greek. Anyway, so the murder mysteries are kind of separate, and you have to sort of think about the red herrings and clues and all of that. The trilogies are more like I want people to be able to just play the middle part. So you have to have one overall sort of arc that goes through the entire all of the 3 adventures, and that could be, you know, beat up the big bad or destroy the orb stones or whatever it is. You'll have one sort of overall mission that you need to accomplish, and then you have 3 separate adventures. But each of the separate adventures will have their own sort of inciting event, side quest, and different story paths or whatever. So they are linked together, but they are written like they are one single adventure. And we usually write a little section, like if you haven't played the previous trilogy, because you shouldn't be able to do that. You can just sort of like, right, I want to have a seafaring adventure. I can take adventure number 2 in the Nine Omens trilogy and just play that part. So it's like, we're now on a ship, and all of that. So pirates and it's really fun. So that's how it differs. The murder mystery tends to become a little bit longer, especially if there is more NPCs. So they have. Otherwise, I'm trying to stick to the bloody word count. But when it comes to the murder mysteries, it's okay if they are longer because they need more background story. The characters will need more sort of fleshing out with this. What are they lying about? What are they hiding? And all of that. So they are allowed to be bigger. That's okay. I can live with that. I think I can live with that. Yes, I can. So yeah.
I had a go ahead.
No, talk. I want you to talk about Harper's. I want you to talk about Harper's.
Yeah.
Right
So I had this. So Harper's was kind of our flagship campaign for TPK roleplay, because I had this idea. We had all these people coming together because it was COVID and people were playing online, but everyone's schedule is so hard to work with. So I had this idea of like, what if we did rotating one-shots in a campaign, and like that way if people can't make it to one session, they don't miss out on everything. So it's a bunch of standalone one-shots, but of course I couldn't help myself, and it was like everyone thought that they were just showing up for one-shots, but meanwhile I've been placing in clues since the very first episode, and then I think around like session 10 out of 20, they were finally like, now wait a second, is there something larger going on here? And it was like, yes, there is. But it was very much that. It's like each one was standalone, but I just couldn't help myself, and there was an overarching plot, and then we ended up at a bad guy, and it was a very much like we ended up in Strahd was in his pajamas kind of moment after this huge big epic campaign. But yeah, I love the whole standalone where yes, you can just show up and play it, but there are little tidbits here and there that can be like followed, like little threads that you can pull and just find your way to the larger story.
And that's a little bit how the trilogy books work. So initially, first of all, you have this sort of friend follow. Well, he becomes a friend eventually. You meet a dwarf called Bjorn Amberclan, and he will join you as an NPC companion through all of these adventures. And I think it's in somewhere in around adventure 4, Secrets of the Drow. That's when the orb stones are sort of introduced as these are the orb stones, and then later on you will take 3 adventures to actually find all of the orb stones, and then later on you will need to destroy the orb stones. So that comes out of, if that is up to level 12 now, around 2/3 of that is it has to do with the orb stones, and it's foreshadowed a little bit as well. So, but again, if you're just playing it for an evening, it's like orb stones. What is that? Doesn't matter. You can still, chop people's head off or try to rob the vault under Seven Keys Library. That works as well. It just, you are going to steal this orb stone. So that's a type of narrative. If you don't want to commit to a full kind of campaign, and that's fine. And also, you might want to sort of, your characters, you want to make a new character because you're bored, and that's fine. You can sort of also say like, well, this is the ending of the trilogy. So it ends here, and everyone is hopefully
nice little
happy.
bow on it, and
Exactly, precisely. And then it's like, but if you want to continue, then here's Buffy season 2. So you can continue pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a nice way of doing it, instead of just sort of waving around, and you never really get to the point either, because that's a problem with a lot of authors. We shall name no names because it's hard to write a book, or so. But some authors, they can be really good writers, but they might not be particularly skilled in actually setting up a full series, or they will write 3 books, and then the publisher will say, "Can you write 8 more?" And they're like, "Okay, I didn't really think about that." So it has to do, obviously, can be things like that. But that's when books sometimes can be a little bit weird. They stop having this first act and second act. It's a continuous story that never really eventually ends.
Never ends.
Yeah, but some of them may not. So.
Yep, you got those
7
filler
pages
episodes.
describing her skirts. Yep. Let's go on.
Yep, those filler episodes where it's just like, and you're headed towards the main plot, but we don't know what you're going to do there yet. So instead, this thing happens. Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit like the last 2 Harry Potter movies, where it's like, okay, camping, really? 45 minutes of camping? Interesting. I don't know.
Or let's wander around the castle while an entire epic wizard battle is going on outside. But no, we're just wandering around the castle right now.
Yeah.
Oh, geez,
but again, I mean, I don't know how to make films, so I shouldn't really say anything. And I tip my hat to anyone who was involved in the Harry Potter movies. You did a great job, and I could not have done it better. Guaranteed. So I don't want to trash talking anyone, but that is an example of where I think it might have been a better idea to sort of wrap it up nicely and take it.
It's tricky. What you're describing with planting seeds, planting small clues throughout along the story, and having the players go, hang on, that is, I mean, as a GM, is probably the most rewarding thing. And you go, yes. But you try to keep a straight face, and you go, what? Is there anything special going on there? But inwardly, you sort of, oh, I love this.
Yeah, you're like bonus XP to this person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's very rare, I find, in adventures that you get to find these kind of things. I know that in the official adventures, in the modules, wizards have planted sort of Easter eggs that they sort of crop up, what's called the monoliths that crop up every so often. But they are for the GMs rather than for the players, because you wouldn't have a player counting all of those. But in actual adventures, it's pretty rare to see things planted that way to leave you with a big aha moment or have a major twist at the end. It's like, it's not Strahd. Strahd is being controlled by someone else. I mean, imagine that. You go, wait, what? We've been staring at Ravenloft for like 10 levels, and it's not him?
Those druids.
Yeah, the druids were
I don't trust them.
So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think...
Well done.
Yeah, I just feel like TTRPGs are such an interesting media. You know what I mean? Because, Tove, you were talking about, like, movies or books, but, like, it's one thing to write stuff for that, but, like, TTRPGs are alive. Like, your worlds are actively happening. Like, and because of that, it's constant. I feel like the target moves a lot. You know what I mean? Like, we're gonna go in this direction. Oh no, we're not. And my big bad guy, he was wearing bunny slippers and he fell into a pool and he drowned. Like, it gets how winding and turning it can be, and trying to, I mean, Luka talking about the Harpers, like having, like, as you're doing that and like as you're playing through it, and you do have that like screeching halt players, deer in the headlights, like, oh no moment, you know, like mixed in with your serious plot, mixed in with your goofy filler whatever. There's something just incredibly magical. I think that's why we all play TTRPGs, right? It's a fix you can't get anywhere else. You can watch a movie that has a plot twist, and that's great. That's fun. But the plot twist in the TTRPG is just, there's something so special about it that just kind of like, you just, like, it's just different.
Yeah, and you're also in the world, you're in the narrative in a way that is really difficult to replicate in any other situation. Most
of the time you've helped craft it too, so it's also part yours, you know, so it's a lot more investment than just watching something play out.
Absolutely.
No, for sure. And the same thing with computer games where you go like, well, this is my character and this is what I'm gonna wear and all of that. It's all good and fun, and I love computer games. So, but it's not the same thing when you're actually playing as a group. And again, if we have any sort of new DMs who are sort of intimidated by the whole concept about world building, most of the things that player will enjoy can be really simple, and it's usually silly things at 2:00 in the morning that the DM has never ever planned for, and it tends to be hilarious. It's that epic fail, that epic success, or that misunderstanding that someone thought they were talking about a horse. Doesn't matter what it is, but that's the part that people tend to really, really enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sometimes it's definitely the DM like doing a spot-on voice, like in What Happened to Avi Ashford. That's awesome. But sometimes it's actually just the players coming up with their own thing. I misheard you. I thought you said that. What, really? And that's the part where you can just sort of like, that's where you can get away with as a DM, sort of like 3 monsters, 1 trap, and maybe a treasure. But that's pretty much it. And that's why I think, I mean, even if you're following a straight story with a monster hotel, open a door, more goblins, open a door, trolls, zombies, whatever, you are still going to enjoy that evening, because you're going to bicker about, whose time it is to hold the watch and think silly things like that. So
that impromptu cooking competition at 2 a.m. in the inn where your characters were staying. But there's a story. If you leave, no, I got this. Where's the sausage? And it's just you never leave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm gonna shout out Luka here, because that unexpected, like, we're gonna, like, here's this unexpected twist that just makes everything better that you couldn't have accounted for. In my campaign, Luka played a character who was kind of she was intrinsically connected to the magic of the world. And on TBK, we have these fun ways that chat can interact with the games, and she got hit with a bad table. And the bad table was she had to murder the nearest, like, government official, or she got this uncontrollable urge to, like, take down the government. And the timing of it was insane, because I was starting to, like, introduce my, like, overarching plot, and that was the episode where I introduced my BBEG, who was this, like, upstanding member of a city council. So now I was trying to pitch through as a very ambiguous, like, look at this guy, everyone loves him, he's such a good guy, and yet I have this player who's driven by this, like,
murder him.
Yeah, like, get him. And it ended up being, like, feeding so perfectly and beautifully into the larger story, because it was like, no, because she's so connected with the magic of the world, her gut told her that he was a bad guy, despite all, you know what I mean? And I couldn't have written that. I couldn't have accounted for that, not in any way, shape, or form. But, like, letting the happy accidents, like, it's very Bob Ross, like, happy little accidents, like,
sailing forward.
Sailing forward, yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, that works. So, and if you make a mistake, just build on that, So, and if someone points out that, that doesn't really make sense, ask yourself, okay, well, maybe it doesn't, because I spent 5 minutes on preparing this adventure, so fair. But then you go like, how can I make it, can it make sense? You can just work a little bit with it. Or sometimes in the real world, things won't actually make sense. And that's fine. It's the same thing with, you will not kill all of the monsters. Sometimes you will run screaming. And that was a good call, because, you would have died otherwise. So, yeah, that's I think that's my opinion when it comes to things like that, how it's like, and the same thing when you were playing with the Tabaxi, sort of like, he's gonna sit on babies. Oh my god, I died, and that was definitely not part of my adventure. I took no credit for using those number. So it's brilliant.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Once you introduce the chemical X that are players, it just completely upends. But, like, it's just that beautiful synthesis that you just don't get other places, that I think video games have tried to do with the choose your own adventure open world style, but it's just it's a different drug. Luka, we've got this, we're getting close to the end of our time together, and so we've got one last question from chat that I want to cover off. Luka, can you go ahead?
Yeah, so Proper asked in chat, since we're kind of getting to the end, we'd love to hear what stories are coming up from you guys, but also what stories do you want to tell, but you're maybe not yet ready to write?
Well,
Over to you.
I have 4 different things that I would like to do, and that would take me 2 years. So now it's more a question of what do I need to do first. So we have written the adventures for Hunter's Full Moon. Those were the first type of adventures that we wrote, and we would like to go back to them and make them sort of happening, like we did with the Secrets of the Drow. Make them proper, go back. Maybe we are better at writing now 2 years later. I like to say yes. We are working with better artists. So we have Alina Minar, she makes like beautiful NPCs portrait. We have Dark Realms Maps, who makes beautiful maps. So we like to go back to those sort of like and people are sort of harassing us as well. We're like, okay, how do you count here? This isn't Star Wars, what are you doing? Are you ever going to publish, the first 2 adventures trilogies? We're like, yes. So we did Secrets of the Drow. We would like to do Hunter's Full Moon. That is probably going to happen during next year. And then I have a murder mystery that I would like to do. So that is probably going to happen next time Erik has a fever and I'm talking into it. So,
it's fairly unusual that I see.
And then we also have, so Prophecy of Nine Omens kind of ends, there is an ending there. But for some reason, the story has continued. I don't know why, but we have play tested 2 of the adventures. One is set in Shadowfell and the other one in Feywild. And the third one is going to be in the Abyss. So that would be kind of nice. And then people have talked about that they want a campaign guide. So some of those 4, but I don't know which order. It depends.
Awesome. So, and before we go to just, if you wouldn't mind, because we know people can go to the Kickstarter, they can make the after the close pledge kind of a deal. Can you just give us like a paragraph teaser of what they can expect from that particular adventure?
From that trilogy, the adventurers are asked to help protect a town called Winterhold from the threat of Dark Elves, because there is an increased number of raids going on and people are being kidnapped, but no one really knows why. The GM will obviously be told why. And as the story unfolds, there are more and more signs of something really hideous going on or about to happen, and ultimately the characters would be on the characters' shoulders to try to stop a pretty big disaster from happening. There are nuances. There are some maybe unexpected developments in the story. There will be plenty of Dark Elves. Plenty of...
What's not to like?
Yeah, and not necessarily your ordinary run-of-the-mill monster hotel. There will be some unusual twists and turns when you're trying to stop this catastrophe. Pretty big room for disasters to happen. We've had some hilarious feedback going on from GMs saying this might have been the most entertaining adventure I've ever GM. Also, how dangerous is this? Because
it's like Curse of Strahd's Kitchen situation, but reversed. So
interesting thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
don't storm the castle.
There's that.
Awesome. So it sounds great. I think we've got, yes, Proper's already got us covered with the website in the chat and everything. Go check out that Kickstarter. Thank you. We're actually gonna close out here. We just want to thank Erik, Tove. Thank you so much for coming and talking with us today. It's been just an absolute pleasure. You guys are wonderful and delightful in all the ways. Chat, thank you for the questions and coming out. This will be available later, and we hope you're able to check out the parts that you missed. Luka, anything you want to say in parting?
No, this is just, it's been wonderful talking about these adventures and all of the little narrative threads and clues and crafting things. It's been amazing.
Awesome. And Erik, Tove, any parting thoughts from you?
Well, thanks for having us and inviting us. I was really scared doing this, so thank you. And also to the viewers, thank you. Yeah.
Awesome.
I don't know, is this cheesy? It's cheesy. I'm doing it anyway, so
Love it.
thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, chat, until next time, we just encourage you to enjoy your piping hot coffee.
And your cold-blooded murders.
Bye, guys.